Hi, I'm Mary Gilkerson and welcome to this week's Painter's Tips. There are two problems that I hear about over and over again from my students. The first is how to make the color in their paintings more vibrant and less dull. The second is how to get some control over what feels like a chaos of color, how to make the color in their paintings more harmonious. The answer to both questions really is the same. Sometimes less is more. To get your color under control and to make them more vibrant, there are two main strategies. The first is to use optical color in your paintings. More on that later in another video. But the second is what we're going to focus on here today. Start using a limited double primary palette, one that includes a warm and a cool version of each of those primaries. What exactly is a limited palette? A limited palette means reducing down the number of tubes of paint you're working with, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're reducing the number of colors. By choosing that double primary palette and using a warm and cool version of each primary plus white, you can mix the full range of hues. In looking at the double primary palette, I think one of the main reasons to approach that is for simplicity. Also for becoming extremely familiar with your colors, with your paints, learning how to mix more with less. It also gives you less that you have to carry around as you're working out in the field. I think it is tremendously helpful in creating a color scheme that hangs together and is harmonious, primarily because the colors that you're mixing are related to each other. So you can get a lot from limiting your palette. Doesn't mean you can't use other colors, but certainly when you're first starting out and if you're having trouble with color, backing up and getting off of having a full array of 20 or 30 tubes of paint is a sure and certain way of becoming much, much more familiar and adept at using color in your paintings. So, for example, this painting here was painted with mixtures completely from that double primary palette with very limited additions of Italian terre verte and Egyptian violet. So from that combination, I could make all of the rich colors that you see in here. It makes it much easier to create color harmony and to begin to explore optical color rather than local color. So I want to emphasize again that when you're exploring color, try not to go down the rabbit hole of worrying about color theory too much, that it is much easier to understand color by looking at paint rather than theory. So don't worry about color theory, don't worry about complementary colors, don't worry about color schemes. Instead, focus on the paint itself and learning to mix the paint. So most people think of color palettes as being ones that focus on the theoretical, on those three primary colors, on blue, yellow, and red, and from the mixtures of those. So in that theoretical sense, those primaries can be used to make a full range palette by combining the primaries into secondaries. We've all seen these illustrations in textbooks back in high school, if you took art in high school or into college, but they are purely theory. When you go to mix paint, the palette doesn't look like this, and therein lies much of people's frustration. And the main reason it doesn't look like that is that these three primaries that you see in this diagram don't exactly exist in paint. They exist in color theory, and they exist in the way we combine inks and light on computer screens and in print, but not in pigments. So trying to mix exactly that when you get to a palette can lead to pure frustration. Instead, try using a double primary palette. What I mean by that is pick a warm and a cool version of each of those primaries, and it's much easier to get something close to the pure primary colors and then the purer secondary colors. So for the primary blues, use ultramarine blue and phthalo blue. Ultramarine is slightly warmer than phthalo. Both of them are cool colors, but ultramarine is a little bit closer to red and phthalo is a little bit closer to green. Then for the two reds, I would suggest avoiding cadmium, for instance. Go to naphthol red, which is a cadmium substitute, and naphthol crimson, which is a substitute for alizarin crimson. So you want a warm red and a cool red. Naphthol and cadmium have a little bit of an orange tinge to them, and crimson has a little bit of a blue tinge to it. So with the addition of those two reds, you have something that comes close to pure red. Then for the two yellows, I kind of veer off of that double primary in a sense, in that I have started using Indian yellow as my main yellow. Indian yellow in combination with white in various quantities becomes either warmer or cooler. So Indian yellow becomes very, very close to pure primary yellow. So you can mix a full range of yellows just with that Indian yellow. It is super intense though, and it also varies from one paint manufacturer to another. But because it's super, super intense, the addition of yellow ochre as the second yellow makes it very easy to mix the full range of greens that really do enrich a palette. So for the two yellows, I use Indian yellow and yellow ochre. Then for white, I strongly, strongly recommend titanium white. There are a lot of whites out there on the market. One of the most beloved by more traditional painters is lead white. Lead white is very dangerous to use. It has lead in it. You don't want that sitting around your house if you have children or pets. Very, very useful white, the one that I use in my studio all the time, is based on titanium white, and that is Gamblin's flake white replacement. It doesn't have any lead in it, but it is a titanium white that has been naturally thickened so that it has a lot of the body and properties of flake white without the inherent dangers. Almost all brands have a pure titanium white available. The one you want to avoid besides flake white is zinc white. Zinc is very brittle, and over time, not a very long time either, zinc will begin cracking and flaking, especially if it's applied thinly. So you want to avoid any white that has a large proportion of zinc in it. I have had some catastrophes with zinc, so I'm speaking from personal experience. I had some small paintings that I had used a fast-drying white in, and that fast-drying white was predominantly zinc white. And within 6 months, those areas that had a lot of that white in it were beginning to crack, and I had to go back and repair a major number of paintings. You don't want to have to go through that, so avoid zinc white. It is not permanent over any long length of time, and I'm talking about not even a short period of time, really. 3 to 6 months out, it'll begin cracking and pulling back, so it'll look like a Renaissance painting with crackulature all over it. So make sure you're using titanium white. From those 7 tubes of paint, you can mix almost everything you can think of. So with that limited palette, you can mix everything else. Doesn't mean you have to be totally limited and never use any other colors, but it means that if you use those to begin with, you'll become much, much, much more familiar with how the paint interacts. You'll have more harmonious color combinations, and then you can slowly begin to add in some of those other convenience colors. Here is the full palette mixed with just those split primary colors. Trying to get that centered a little bit. So you can see at the top, I have a warm red and a cool red, and you can see very clearly that the warm red looks a little bit more orange, that there's a warm blue and a cooler blue, and that ultramarine blue is closer to red than it is to green. that there is a warm yellow and a cool yellow over there on the palette. All of the colors in between, all of the secondary and tertiary colors on this palette, on this color wheel, have been mixed from those 6 split primary colors. So just living proof, you can mix them all. So the yellow green, the green, the blue green, all of those came from Indian yellow and blue, from the phthalo blue, because phthalo blue, green shade, there are 2 phthalo blues, but phthalo blue mixed with Indian yellow makes very, very rich, intense greens. All of the purples and the violets on this color wheel have been mixed from the crimson and the ultramarine blue. Again, leads to very, very rich colors. All of the oranges have been mixed from the naphthol red and the Indian yellow, again, leading to very, very rich colors. Let's look at these a little bit closer so that you can see what happens when you use those more pure colors. One of the problems that people have when they're mixing color is that they don't realize the impact of a warm or a cool primary on their mixtures. So if you want to make a good orange, you need to use that warm red, not the cool one. If you want to make a good violet, you need to use the cool red, not the warm one. And the reason for that is the warm red has a little tiny bit of orange in it. So if I mix that warm red with ultramarine blue, the orange is going to dull out the blue, and I'll end up with a dull violet instead of a rich violet. Now, you can use those in your paintings to make some very, very rich neutral colors, but when you're trying to mix intense color, that's not going to work out so well. If you try to mix orange from the crimson and yellow, you're going to, again, end up with a slightly dulled color because of the slight blue tinge to that cool red. So keep that in mind as you're mixing colors. So the writing's going crooked here, but I've flipped the blues just so you can think about the impact of the warm blue versus the cool blue. In order to get violet, you really need to use ultramarine blue. Blue violet is made from a mixture of violet and the warm blue. If you try to use the cooler phthalo blue green shade, you're going to, again, dull the color out, and you're not going to get as rich a blue violet. And the same with the yellows. So with the Indian yellow, using that rich, rich, intense yellow, rather than splitting it between something like Hansa yellow and lemon yellow, you're going to be able to mix that full range of yellows with that one color. Because remember, Indian yellow really qualifies as almost a pure yellow, even though in this image it looks like that Indian yellow is a little dulled out. Indian yellow is almost entirely pure yellow. So you can mix a very, very pure, rich yellow-green that is equivalent to cinnabar green light by mixing Indian yellow, phthalo blue green shade, and a little tiny bit of white. You can make a really beautiful, rich yellow-orange by mixing Indian yellow and naphthol red. So you can dramatically increase the purity of your colors and the richness of your colors by using that double primary palette. From those, you can mix almost anything you can think of. So the palette that you see here was almost entirely mixed from those double primary colors. So you can mix a rich violet that is the equivalent of Egyptian violet purely from the ultramarine blue and the crimson. It won't have the same tinting strength as the Egyptian violet or the dioxazine violet, but it will have the same richness. So again, think about using those double primary colors in your paintings and get really familiar with how those mixtures work. I don't think you really need to worry about color theory more than mixing a color wheel from those double primary colors and then posting it somewhere in your studio to refer back to. Hope that's been helpful. And let me see if anybody has any questions over here on Facebook. Not seeing too many yet, but if you do have any, by all means, feel free to post them into the on the page, and I'll be happy to come back and answer any questions people have. Carol, she says, I'm not able to get this to go on your iPad. Try refreshing the window, Carol, and you should be able to get it to work. And if you don't get it to work right now, it's recorded, so you'll be able to come back to it later and play it back. So hope that's been helpful, and I look forward to seeing y'all over in my free Facebook group, Artwork Living. Or you can hop over to my website, and I'll post the link at the top here to read through the blog post I have on the basic materials. And I have the listing of those double primary colors on there. So I'll post that in just a minute. And hope to see y'all soon. I do have a question here from Ann Becker. Is Indian yellow the same as yellow ochre or another yellow? It is totally different, Ann. It is a pure yellow, whereas yellow ochre is a slightly dulled yellow. So you need both. And Indian yellow, when it's mixed with a tiny little bit of white, because Indian yellow is transparent, becomes the really rich yellow that's similar to cadmium yellow. So you can get away from the cadmiums by using Indian yellow, especially if it's the Williamsburg yellow. So it's radically different. I will try to post some images of just the tubes. I think I have those pulled up. I just didn't get them into the presentation. But I do have the tubes, the 6 tubes themselves, so that you can see how those work. Dave asks, does this work for your earth tones? Yes, it does. You can mix, and that's one reason I have the yellow ochre on there. You can mix all of your earth colors from pure colors, and they'll be incredibly rich. So you can mix your neutrals from that double split primary and primary palette. So if you want to get something that's close, for example, to burnt sienna, mix ultramarine blue and warm red, the naphthol red. It's just going to be more red than blue. So a tiny little bit of blue into that naphthol red is going to create a really lovely burnt sienna. Where this comes in handy is if you're in a situation where you've run out of a color's not available. I've had that happen when I've been printing before, where there was no burnt sienna left. And so I had to make my own from the naphthol red and the ultramarine blue. So it makes it much easier to mix colors on the go. Then Natalie says, I'm saying to buy the phthalo blue, it should be the green shade. Yes, Natalie, there are 2 phthalo blues. There is a phthalo blue shade, a warm shade, and then the phthalo blue green shade. Sometimes it's called phthalo blue red shade, and they are different. The phthalo blue red shade is almost ultramarine blue, so make sure you get the phthalo blue green shade. So there you have it. Try working with a double primary limited palette until you get more confident in your approach to color. Then very slowly add back in just the minimum number of convenience colors that'll speed up your painting process. I frequently hear from people both in my free online Facebook group and in my courses that they really would like to have a more deep connection to color. They'd like to find confidence in handling color, and boy, I totally get that. Color is both important and infinitely satisfying, but learning to control it really does take time, attention, patience, and observation. I've put together a playful and powerful in-person workshop, The Language of Color and Light, with the intention of supporting you to discover, explore, and hone your own unique color language. The Language of Color and Light will be the last in-person workshop until the fall. I would love to have you join me for this very special get-together, May 25th through the 28th. You can find all the juicy details by following the link in the comments below. Please note that I've announced this workshop through my newsletter, so there are only a few spots left. Don't hesitate to sign up if you're feeling a call to join us and explore color more deeply. I expect these spots will go really fast. That's all for now, folks, so happy painting!